This is a continuation of Chapter 9 for William Wilberforce. This is an image of a man in chains, and it says at the bottom, "Am I not a man and a brother?" pleading to people to recognize that he is a human and should not be treated so horribly as a slave, and did not be a slave at all. Besides all these activities, the abolitionists circulated petitions. On April 2nd, 1792, when Wilberforce made a speech on the floor of Parliament and again moved that the slave trade should be abolished, he presented 499 petitions and almost 1,000,000 signatures that all declared support to end slavery and support his cause. The slave owners presented just 5 petitions with signatures of people who wanted to support the slave trade. Dundas, one of the senior members of the House, stood immediately after Wilberforce concluded his speech. "I fully agree with the goals Mr. Wilberforce has laid before us," he said. "However, I propose that we seek the same ends by regulating the trade rather than abolishing it outright." Fox was furious. "And what regulations would the gentleman propose?" he roared. Dundas was ready. "Regulations that will promote the breeding of people in the West Indies so that there is no more need for importation," so that they don't have to go get more from Africa. They would just have people have children, and those children would be slaves, is what he was saying. "Regulations that will put an end gradually to hereditary slavery. Regulations that will improve the conditions of existing slaves, and regulations that will provide for the education of their children," he replied. Dundas then turned to face the House. "I appeal to all gentlemen of the moderate or middle way of thinking to avoid the extreme policies and associated dangers of Mr. Wilberforce's proposal." Fox could not contain his anger. "The idea of moderation in the slave trade," he thundered, "reminds me of the suggestion that to break into a man's house and kill him, his wife, and his family in the night is certainly an awful crime, but even this may be done with moderation. The real question is not whether that disgusting trade requires regulation, but whether it is fit to be continued at all." He calmed himself and then concluded, "It seems to me, sir, that by proposing regulation, Mr. Dundas is asking to lay a foundation for preserving this trade, and not merely for years, but forever." It was now Dundas's turn to interrupt. "Rather than prolonging the debate, let me propose a single amendment," he suggested. "Let us insert the word 'gradually' in Mr. Wilberforce's notion. I believe the value of my proposal will be obvious to any level-headed gentleman." And so it was that on April 3rd, 1792, at 7 in the morning, having debated all night, Britain's House of Commons adopted Dundas's amendment by a vote of 193 to 125, and Wilberforce's motion as amended 230 to 85. The slave trade was to be abolished gradually. But what does gradually mean? Wilberforce wanted to know. How would Parliament measure its proposed gradual abolition? After having debated all night, no one in the House was prepared to answer these questions, but the members of the House walked out into the morning sunshine, having at least implied that the slave trade was wrong, even if they hadn't yet decided exactly what to do about it. Chapter 10. The Middle Passage. Wilberforce was unwilling to let the House get away with its vague statement about gradual abolition. He demanded to know what, specifically, that word gradual meant. 3.5 weeks later, on April 27, 1792, he received his answer. The House agreed the word gradual meant 4 years in the future. The slave trade, the capture and transport of African slaves, was to end by 1796, unless it proved too difficult. Having now voted to gradually abolish the slave trade, and having defined the word gradually, the House of Commons then passed its bill on to the House of Lords. This time it was the Lords who used a tactic that had been used in the Commons 3 years before. The Lords delayed the bill so that they could collect evidence. Too bad they never gathered any, and so as a result, the Lords never voted on the bill, and the bill died of neglect. Despite the ultimate death of his bill, Wilberforce determined to try again. In February 1793, England went to war with France. When a country goes to war, the legislative branch will usually push all other concerns to the end of the agenda. Despite the war, Wilberforce stood to make a motion for gradual abolition. As we've already seen, Dundas's most identical motion the previous year had passed by a wide margin, but in 1793 it was defeated. How discouraging. But Wilberforce was not to be turned aside. Later that year, he thought he might be able to limit the slave trade by prohibiting British ships from transporting slaves for sale in foreign countries. So Wilberforce proposed a bill to that effect. His foreign slave bill was defeated by just 2 votes. In the next few paragraphs, I'm going to tell you only the barest details of what Wilberforce did. For years, year after year, recounting these few details in such a short space will almost certainly give you the wrong impression. You will feel as if all Wilberforce had to do was stand up, say a few words, sit down, then wait a year to do the same thing once more. The truth is far more complicated. You should keep in mind that what Wilberforce did in all of these years was at least as difficult as what I've told you in the last 4 chapters. Every year. And Wilberforce himself and those who supported him faced not just ridicule, but real danger to themselves and their families. Those who opposed them did so not only with rational arguments in Parliament, but with threats and actions that put the abolitionists in physical danger and fear of real harm. I will not recount those details, just know that the details could be told. The outline of Wilberforce's political movement can be summarized as follows. 1794, this is the very next year, Wilberforce proposed another foreign slave bill. This one passed the Commons by 18 votes, but no one was willing to bring it up for a vote in the House of Lords. 2 years later, in 1796, the year by which the Commons had agreed the trade should be abolished, Wilberforce was finally able to bring forward another bill for debate. Things looked bright for the motion until the night when the final vote was to be taken. Dundas gave 6 or 7 of Wilberforce's supporters free tickets to attend the opening night performance of a new opera. And so Dundas was present, while Wilberforce's friends were not, and Wilberforce's motion was defeated by a vote of 70 to 74. In 1797, Wilberforce lost by a vote of 74 to 82, just 6 votes. 1798, the vote was 83 to 87, 4 votes. 1799, 54 to 84, 30 votes. In 1800, Wilberforce didn't propose a bill because the slave owners implied that they were willing to negotiate a settlement. Nothing came of their proposal, however, so 4 years later, in 1804, Wilberforce made new motion. Astonishingly, it passed Commons by a vote of 124 to 49. Victory looked so close! But as had occurred in 1792, the bill was defeated in the House of Lords. The Lords actually voted on it this time, but 4 royal dukes took the lead in opposing the measure. It was to be at least another year before Wilberforce could push the issue again. In 1805, Wilberforce lost once more. His bill was defeated by Commons by a vote of 70 to 77. Talk about discouraging. Where had all the votes from 1804 gone? As if the vote in 1805 had not been bad enough, by Christmas, Pitt was deathly ill. And in January 1806, Pitt died. Wilberforce lost the one who had supported him more faithfully and effectively than any others through all the years he had been in Parliament. Chapter 11. The End Game. After 18 years of defeat, and now with his best friend, one of the most powerful men in all of Britain, dead, the future looked bleak for Wilberforce. It was then that James Stephen, Wilberforce's brother-in-law, suggested a bold and creative idea. He caught Wilberforce in the hall just an hour before Wilberforce planned to make his annual motion against the trade. "Look here," said Stephen. "Remember Pitt's order in council last September? We always emphasized how it forbade importing slaves into Dutch New Guinea, but it went further, remember? It forbade British ships from carrying slaves to any foreign territory. It also forbade them from bringing slaves to newly acquired British territories. And lastly, it forbade outfitting foreign slave ships in British ports. But the slave holders were perfectly happy." "Yes," said Wilberforce, "I remember." "Well," Stephen continued, "it is normal for an order in council to be confirmed by a bill in Parliament. The slave interests were delighted with Pitt's order, and I think they would support a bill to extend the order, since it protects our interests against foreign competition. But from our perspective, it would, for the first time, place Parliament in a position of limiting and not merely regulating the trade." Wilberforce's eyes shone with pleasure. "Oh, that's a wonderful idea!" he exclaimed. He withheld making his motion that evening. Instead, he and Stephen carefully laid new plans, and when they presented their bill, it floated through Parliament more smoothly than even Stephen had imagined. Virtually no one opposed it. Having achieved a first limitation on the trade, Wilberforce, Stephen, and other abolitionists, including the new Prime Minister, Lord Grenville, worked together on the next step. Rather than have Wilberforce introduce another bill in the Commons, they agreed to have Grenville introduce a bill in the House of Lords. The entire approach could lead to a new outcome. By having Grenville introduce it, the bill would enjoy a tremendous advantage because it would be a government issue. On January 2nd, 1807, the Prime Minister, Lord Grenville, moved in the House of Lords his bill for the abolition of the slave trade. The most important provision was this one. After May 1st, 1807, the African slave trade and all manner of dealing and trading in the purchase of slaves or their transport from Africa to the West Indies or any other territory is utterly abolished, prohibited, and declared to be unlawful. Beyond that, any British ship found to be involved in the trade would immediately become property of the crown. That means the ship that would then be owned by the King and Queen of England. The motion was delayed for several months, but when debate finally got underway, it passed the Lords by a majority of 64 votes. In the Commons, the Foreign Secretary introduced the bill, and many others gave their hearty approval. Only 2 people spoke against it. The capstone of the debate, which wasn't really a debate at all, occurred when the Attorney General spoke. Rather than addressing the bill itself, he turned to praise Wilberforce. "When I consider the feelings that will accompany my honorable friend after tonight's vote," he began. He was never permitted to finish his sentence. Round after round of cheers filled the house. Wilberforce sat with his head in his hands, tears streaming down his face. Could it actually be? Was it possible that his dream, Pitt's dream, the dream of so many of his friends, would actually be fulfilled this night, some 20 years after the Committee for the Abolition of the Slave Trade had first formed? It seemed impossible, but minutes later he had his answer. The House voted in favor of the bill by a resounding 283 to 16. Later that evening, joking with a friend, Wilberforce laughed. "Well, Henry, what shall we abolish next?" Someone else remarked, "What shall we do with those 16 villains who voted against us?" "Never mind the miserable 16, Wilberforce replied. "Think of the glorious 283. Sir James Mackintosh, when he heard of the vote, wrote to congratulate Wilberforce from Bombay, India. "We are apt to express wonder that so much exertion should be necessary to stop such an awful injustice," he said. "We ought rather to marvel that it would take but the short span of one man's life to remedy the misery of millions for ages."